100 million years ago, a snake coiled itself inside a dinosaur nest and waited. It wasn't large enough to take on the adults. It didn't need to be. The eggs were hatching, and for a few brief moments, the largest animals on Earth were the size of a human hand. One fossil preserves exactly that moment. A snake still curled around a crushed egg, next to the bones of a hatchling that never made it further than the shell, frozen that way for 67 million years. This is what's strange about the age of dinosaurs. They were enormous, dominant, built for a world that seemed designed around them. And yet the fossil record keeps turning up the same quiet reminder. They weren't safe, not at the water's edge, not at the nest, not even from animals a fraction of their size. There is a fossil from China, a mammal the size of a badger, teeth buried in the ribs of a dinosaur 3 times its weight. Both of them locked together at the moment a volcanic mudslide buried them alive. The mammal was winning. There is amber from Myanmar, nearly 100 million years old, holding feathers. Inside those feathers, still in place, are the preserved bodies of parasites that spent their lives feeding on creatures we've spent centuries imagining as rulers. The story of the dinosaurs is usually told from above, from size, from dominance, from the animals that could be seen coming. Today, we tell their story from the edges, from the things that waited, crept, and arrived without warning. If this kind of slow, careful journey through deep time is what you come here for, a like and subscribe means you won't miss the next one. And if you're already settled in for the night, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Now, we begin. A fossil holds stillness more faithfully than it holds feeling. Stone preserves position, pressure, contact, the quiet geometry of a moment that once unfolded in motion. What it does not preserve is the inner life of the animals within it. There is no imprint for alarm, no mineral trace of hesitation, and yet within that silence, patterns of danger remain visible, clear enough to read without needing to name an emotion. In this story, the idea of fear is not drawn from imagined reactions, but from evidence of real risk. It appears where bone meets tooth, where a surface is scored or fractured in ways that match a bite. It appears inside rib cages that contain the remains of something smaller, carried there by digestion rather than accident. It appears in rare positions where 2 bodies are locked together, limbs aligned in ways that suggest struggle rather than rest. These are not symbols or guesses. They are physical records of contact, each one marking a moment when survival narrowed. Other traces are quieter but no less telling. A nesting ground leaves behind clusters of shells, some whole, some broken, arranged in patterns that suggest repeated return. Around them, small disturbances accumulate, fragments displaced, edges crushed, signs that something visited these sites with purpose. In amber, minute bodies remain caught among feathers, their forms intact, their presence fixed against the surface they once inhabited. Such details speak of lives spent feeding without killing, of pressure that did not end in a single event, but continued across days and seasons. Habitats themselves carry part of the story. Sediment layers reveal environments where visibility was limited, where footing shifted under weight, where the boundary between solid ground and water blurred. In these places, size alone offered no guarantee. A large body could become unstable, its movements slowed or redirected by terrain. Nearby, other forms, shaped for that setting, moved with ease. The record does not need to show a full encounter to suggest what might have followed. The conditions are enough. From these pieces, a clearer meaning emerges. An animal does not need to be overwhelmed everywhere to face danger somewhere. Strength can define one part of life while vulnerability shapes another. A creature built for open ground may find itself less certain at the edge of a river or during the earliest stage of its own growth. Each phase, each location, carries its own balance, shifting the outcome of an encounter before it begins. This perspective changes how the age of dinosaurs is seen. Their size and structure gave them presence across wide landscapes, yet no single form could command every setting at once. The young began small, exposed to risks that did not apply to the fully grown. Movement between environments introduced new variables, new kinds of contact. Even the surface of the body, covered in skin or feather, became a place where other organisms lived and fed. What follows is not a catalog of a single adversary, but a gradual mapping of these openings. Early life transitional spaces and the close contact between bodies all form part of a larger pattern. Within it, the idea of fear becomes unnecessary as a word. The evidence itself is enough. Each trace a quiet indication that even the most dominant forms moved through a world where danger was never absent, only distributed in ways that required constant adjustment. Long before the silhouettes we recognize took shape, the land was already occupied by bodies built for control. The Triassic world did not wait for dinosaurs to arrive. It was filled with reptiles that had already learned how to move, hunt, and endure within its shifting climates. Dry plains stretched between seasonal rivers, and across those spaces, a variety of forms tested different solutions to survival, each one part of a broader lineage known as archosaurs. These early archosaurs were not a single kind of animal, but a wide and branching family. From a common origin, their descendants diverged into distinct paths, each adapting to its own way of life. One branch led toward creatures whose descendants would later resemble modern crocodilians, grounded, powerful, and often close to water. Another branch rose into forms that would eventually give rise to birds, with limbs and structures that allowed for different balances of speed and posture. Dinosaurs emerged within this second line, not as an immediate culmination, but as one possibility among many still unfolding. In those early stages, their presence was modest. Small, lightly built bodies moved through environments already shaped by larger and more established animals. Some of these neighbors walked on four limbs with a heavy, deliberate stride. Others carried themselves upright, supported by hind legs that allowed for bursts of speed across open ground. Armor, claws, and teeth appeared in different combinations, reflecting a variety of feeding strategies and defensive needs. No single design dominated entirely. Instead, the land held a mixture of approaches, each one effective within certain conditions. The Triassic did not offer certainty. Climate shifts, changing vegetation, and periodic upheavals created a setting where success could be temporary. Within that uncertainty, early dinosaurs existed alongside rivals that were often larger and already well adapted. Their bodies carried the potential for later expansion, but at this point, that future remained unexpressed. They were part of a landscape where competition was constant and where the outcome of encounters depended on more than simple size. Some of the most imposing figures of this time belonged to the crocodile-line archosaurs. These animals were not confined to water. Many lived entirely on land, moving with strength and stability, equipped with jaws capable of handling substantial prey. Their forms suggest a level of control that did not rely on a single habitat, allowing them to occupy spaces that early dinosaurs also needed. The overlap created a quiet tension, a shared territory where different lineages met under the same conditions. Within this setting, the idea of a single dominant group had not yet taken hold. Evolution had not settled into the patterns that would later define the Mesozoic. Instead, it moved through experimentation, with multiple lineages exploring variations of posture, gait, and feeding. Dinosaurs were present, but they were not yet central. Their eventual prominence would come later, shaped by events that gradually shifted the balance among these competing forms. What remains from this period is a sense of inheritance. When dinosaurs expanded, they did so in a world that had already been structured by others. Pathways through the environment, sources of food, and patterns of movement had been established by these earlier archosaurs. The creatures that would later seem unmatched were, in their beginning, participants in an older system, learning within a landscape defined by close relatives whose designs were no less capable. In that early arrangement, the boundaries between groups were not lines of separation, but points of contact. The most significant pressures did not come from distant or unfamiliar threats, but from animals that shared ancestry, body plans, and ecological roles. The story that follows continues to move through these relationships, where resemblance and rivalry often existed side by side. At the margin where solid ground softened into slow water, a particular shape became common, low, elongated, and almost indistinguishable from the drift it rested upon. In the Triassic, these forms belonged to phytosaurs, reptiles that carried a familiar outline yet stood apart from the crocodiles that would appear later. Their resemblance was not inherited from a shared design in recent ancestry, but formed independently, shaped by the same demands of a life spent waiting at the boundary between two worlds. Their bodies were built for stillness, a long snout extended forward, lined with teeth suited for gripping, while the eyes and nostrils sat high along the skull, allowing most of the head to remain above water even when the rest was concealed. Thick limbs supported their weight on land, yet much of their time was spent partially submerged, where movement could be reduced to almost nothing. Armor lay across their backs in overlapping plates, offering protection without sacrificing flexibility. The entire structure suggested patience, a body designed less for pursuit than for timing. This similarity to later crocodilians is one of the clearer examples of convergent evolution. Two separate lineages, divided by ancestry, arrived at nearly identical solutions because the environment demanded it. The water's edge favors certain strategies. Visibility is limited by reflection and sediment, sound travels differently, and footing shifts beneath weight. In such conditions, the most effective approach is not speed across distance, but proximity without detection. A predator that can remain unnoticed until the final instant gains an advantage that does not depend on size alone. Phytosaurs occupied this role with quiet consistency. Fossil evidence places them along river systems, floodplains, and shallow lakes, environments where other animals would come to drink or cross. Tracks and skeletal remains suggest a pattern of behavior centered on these narrow zones of interaction. Their presence turned these areas into places of exchange, not only between land and water, but between safety and risk. An animal, stepping down from firmer ground, entered a space where its usual balance could be altered in subtle ways. For early dinosaurs, still finding their place among many competing forms, such edges carried a particular weight. Their bodies, often built for movement across open terrain, were not always suited to unstable surfaces or sudden changes in resistance. A foot placed into soft sediment could shift unexpectedly. A step into shallow water could reduce traction. These small differences, barely noticeable in isolation, could accumulate at the moment when a hidden predator chose to act. The interaction did not require prolonged struggle. A sudden lunge from below the surface, driven by powerful jaws and aided by the density of water, could redirect a body before it had time to respond. Even without certainty in every encounter, the pattern remains visible in the distribution of these animals. Phytosaurs were not scattered randomly, they were concentrated where the likelihood of such moments was highest. Over time, the repeated success of this strategy reinforces the lesson carried by their form. When separate evolutionary paths arrive at the same design, it reflects a deep compatibility between structure and environment. The outline of a phytosaur, low in the water with only its upper features exposed, represents a solution that worked often enough to persist across generations. Within the broader landscape, this creates a subtle division of space. Open ground may favor one kind of movement, dense vegetation another, but the boundary between land and water belongs to those adapted to both. For any animal approaching that line, the change is not only physical but ecological. It is a transition into a region already defined by a different set of advantages, held by creatures whose stillness conceals the conditions under which they act. Across the open stretches of Triassic land, movement did not belong to a single kind of body. Different forms crossed the same ground, each carrying its own balance of weight, posture, and force. Among them were Rauisuchians and their close relatives, members of the crocodile-line archosaurs, whose presence shaped the landscape long before dinosaurs became widely recognized. Their steps pressed into dry soil rather than river margins, leaving behind impressions that speak of a life lived fully on land. These animals were not small. Some reached lengths that placed them among the largest terrestrial predators of their time. Their limbs rose beneath the body rather than sprawling outward, allowing for a more elevated stance that brought the torso clear of the ground. This posture gave them a stride that could cover distance with steady confidence. Each movement supported by a skeletal structure built to carry significant mass. Their skulls were broad and reinforced, lined with teeth designed for holding and cutting, a set of tools suited to active predation. The image that forms is not one of waiting at the edge of water, but of deliberate movement across open terrain. Rauisuchians occupied roles that later predators would inherit, yet in this earlier world they stood without those successors. Their presence demonstrates that the crocodile-line archosaurs were not confined to a single ecological niche. Some lineages adapted to aquatic ambush, while others developed into dominant hunters of the land itself, moving through environments that early dinosaurs also inhabited. In this shared space, interactions were shaped by overlapping needs. Food sources, territory, and pathways through the landscape were not exclusive to any one group. Early dinosaurs, still limited in size and diversity, moved among these larger and more established predators. Their bodies carried potential, yet at this stage, that potential remained in quiet formation. They were part of a broader network of life where advantage could shift depending on circumstance, where strength in one moment did not guarantee control in another. Fossil remains suggest that these pseudosuchian predators were effective within their roles. The distribution of their bones across different regions indicates a wide presence, not isolated pockets but a recurring pattern across Triassic environments. Their anatomy supports the idea of active hunting, with limb structures capable of sustained movement and jaws built to manage sizable prey. In this context, early dinosaurs were not alone at the top of any hierarchy. They shared their world with animals whose designs were already refined for dominance on land. The Triassic landscape, seen through this lens, becomes less like a stage awaiting its main actors and more like a field of ongoing competition. Different body plans tested their limits against the same conditions. Some relied on armor and stability, others on speed or endurance, each approach meeting the challenges of climate and terrain in its own way. The presence of Rawasuchians within this mix adds weight to the idea that the rise of dinosaurs was not a simple ascent, but a gradual shift within a crowded system. There is a quiet tension in this arrangement, not a constant conflict visible in every moment, but a persistent overlap of capabilities. Early dinosaurs developed alongside these formidable neighbors, their own adaptations forming in response to a world that did not yield easily. The balance would eventually change, influenced by events that altered the composition of life across the planet. For now, the record holds a different image, one where multiple lineages stood within reach of similar roles, their futures not yet separated. Within that earlier time, the land belonged to no single form. It carried the imprint of many, each leaving traces that together describe a world still in negotiation. There are places where the surface appears undisturbed, where water settles into a muted stillness that reveals very little of what lies beneath. In parts of the Triassic world, such quiet spaces were not empty. They held the continued presence of temnospondyls, a group of amphibians whose lineage reached far back into earlier chapters of life. While newer forms moved across the land, these older bodies remained, shaped by a different rhythm, carrying forward a design that had endured through shifting ages. Some of these temnospondyls grew large, their forms broad and flattened, with wide skulls that spread outward like the surface of the water they inhabited. Their eyes faced upward, positioned to watch what passed above, while much of their bodies rested below, supported by soft sediment. Limbs extended from their sides, adapted for pushing through water or settling into the substrate, rather than for long journeys across dry ground. Their skin, likely moist and permeable, connected them closely to their surroundings, tying their existence to places where water remained. These environments were often shallow, layered with suspended particles that limited clarity. Light reached downward in a softened glow, scattered before it could fully illuminate what rested below. Movement at the surface sent faint disturbances through the water, signals that could be detected without revealing the observer. In such conditions, vision was only one part of awareness. Subtle vibrations carried information, allowing an animal below to sense presence before form became visible. For a creature entering this space, the experience would differ from that of solid ground. Each step into the water altered balance, reducing friction and changing the way weight was distributed. The surface might appear stable, yet beneath it the substrate could shift, offering less support than expected. These small changes, combined with limited visibility, created a setting where reactions could be delayed, even by a moment. Temnospondyls were suited to this environment. Their wide jaws opened quickly, powered by muscles adapted for sudden action rather than sustained effort. The shape of the skull allowed for a broad capture area, increasing the chance of securing whatever passed within reach. Teeth lined the edges, not for slicing, but for holding, ensuring that once contact was made, escape became more difficult. Their strategy did not rely on pursuit. It depended on proximity, on the convergence of movement above with readiness below. Their presence expands the pattern of danger beyond the reptilian forms that often define this period. These amphibians represent a continuity that stretches back through earlier ecosystems, a reminder that not all threats were newly evolved. Some had been refined over long spans of time, their effectiveness maintained through persistence rather than change. They occupied a role that required little alteration, as the conditions they depended on remained consistent across generations. In this way, the Triassic world holds layers that do not align neatly with a single moment in evolution. Older lineages and newer ones coexisted, each carrying its own history into shared spaces. The result is a landscape where different times overlap, where ancient designs remain active alongside emerging forms. The water's edge, already shaped by multiple influences, becomes even more complex when these deeper roots are considered. Within that quiet water, the outline of a temnospondyl would blend with its surroundings, its stillness part of its effectiveness. It did not need to move often. The environment brought opportunity to it, guided by patterns of movement that repeated over time. The oldest strategies can be the most enduring, especially when they are tied to conditions that change very little. Here, beneath a surface that reveals almost nothing, the past continues to act in the present, waiting without urgency, yet always ready. From a distance, the Mesozoic can seem unified, a single expanse where one kind of animal carried its weight across nearly every horizon. Yet the ground beneath those steps was not the only surface that mattered. The world was divided into zones, each shaped by different conditions, each favoring a different set of abilities. What appears continuous from afar resolves, upon closer attention, into a mosaic of territories that did not blend so easily. Open land offered one kind of advantage. There, a large body could translate into reach, stability, and the ability to travel between resources spread across wide distances. Muscles and bones, aligned for sustained movement, could carry an animal through shifting climates and across varied terrain. In such spaces, certain dinosaurs found a rhythm that suited them well. Their forms matched to the demands of ground that held firm beneath their weight. Yet that same body, so effective in one setting, could become uncertain at the edge of another. Where soil softened and water gathered, the conditions changed in ways that did not favor size alone. A heavy step might sink rather than support, altering balance at the moment it was most needed. Resistance from water slowed movement, changing the timing of each action. Visibility shifted as reflections and suspended particles disrupted clear sight. These differences did not erase strength, but they redistributed it, placing emphasis on other traits. Beyond the immediate boundary of land and water, entire systems existed with their own internal logic. Rivers carried currents that shaped movement and constrained direction. Estuaries blended fresh and salt conditions, creating gradients that influenced which species could remain. Shorelines formed narrow bands where multiple environments met, concentrating activity into limited space. Farther still, the open sea extended into depths where light diminished and pressure increased, forming a domain governed by adaptations unrelated to those of terrestrial life. Within each of these zones, specialists emerged. Bodies adapted to water developed structures that reduced drag and increased propulsion. Limbs transformed into paddles or fins, distributing force in ways suited to fluid resistance. Sensory systems adjusted to detect changes in pressure or chemical composition rather than relying solely on sight. These designs did not compete directly with those of land animals, yet they defined regions where different rules applied. For dinosaurs, this meant that presence on land did not extend automatically into these other domains. Even those that approached water regularly did so within limits set by their anatomy. The margin between environments became a place where advantages shifted, where familiarity with one set of conditions did not guarantee control over another. Movement across this boundary required adjustment, and during that adjustment, outcomes could change in subtle but significant ways. The distribution of life across the Mesozoic reflects this division. Fossil assemblages vary from one environment to another, indicating that no single group occupied every space with equal success. Instead, Each habitat held its own community, shaped by factors that could not be overcome by size or strength alone. The result is a landscape composed of adjoining systems, each with its own balance, each interacting at points where their edges met. Within this arrangement, the idea of dominance becomes more precise. It is not a blanket condition, but a context dependent state, defined by where an animal moves and how it engages with its surroundings. Dinosaurs occupied many regions effectively, yet they did so within a larger framework that included other territories beyond their full control. The world they lived in was not a single continuous domain, but a network of spaces, each carrying its own conditions, its own forms, and its own quiet boundaries. A circle of shallow impressions pressed into the ground can hold an entire generation. Within each hollow, a shell once enclosed, a life not yet shaped by the scale it would eventually reach. Before limbs lengthened and bones thickened, before height and mass altered how an animal moved through its surroundings, there was this earlier stage, compact, delicate, and exposed. Every lineage that would later dominate began here, reduced to a size that fit within the curve of a nest. Eggs gathered in clusters create a concentration that rarely occurs elsewhere. Each shell carries nutrients sealed within, a complete package waiting for the right conditions to unfold. When many are placed together, the ground itself becomes a site of accumulation, a place where energy is stored in quiet abundance. Around such sites, traces often repeat across layers of sediment, indicating that these locations were used more than once, returning points in a seasonal rhythm that shaped the movement of other animals nearby. The pattern is not difficult to read. Where resources appear in predictable intervals, attention follows. Predators do not need to search widely when they can remember where and when food will be present. A nesting ground offers more than a single opportunity. It provides a schedule, a cycle that can be revisited. The eggs themselves are immobile, and the hatchlings, in their first moments, move without the coordination or strength that later defines them. This brief period creates a window during which the difference between survival and loss can be determined quickly. Juveniles, once emerged, carry the same limitations. Their bodies are still forming, their movements less efficient, their awareness not yet refined. Even within groups where multiple individuals share the same space, each one remains small in comparison to the world around it. Growth will eventually change this balance, but that change requires time, and time in these environments does not pass without interaction. Breeding grounds extend this vulnerability across wider areas. When many individuals of a species gather to reproduce, they create a density that draws notice. Footprints overlap, sediment is disturbed, and the signs of repeated use accumulate. These areas become part of the landscape, recognized not only by those that return to lay eggs, but by others that learn to associate them with opportunity. The concentration of life, in its earliest stage, becomes a focal point within the broader ecosystem. In this context, the idea of threat shifts away from the fully grown form. The towering bodies that later define a species represent only one phase of its existence. Before that phase, there is a quieter period where the same lineage exists in a much smaller and more fragile state. The risks faced during this time are not abstract. They are embedded in the structure of the environment and the behaviors that repeat within it. The fossil record preserves fragments of these moments. Broken shells, scattered remains, and the arrangement of bones within a nesting site all suggest interactions that occurred at a scale different from the encounters often imagined. These are not clashes between equals, but brief intersections where size and strength are unevenly distributed. The outcome is not always visible in full, yet the traces remain enough to indicate that such events were part of the ordinary flow of life. Within this framework, the future of a species is shaped long before it reaches its largest form. The survival of each generation depends on navigating this early stage, where protection is limited and exposure is high. The grandeur that defines adulthood is built upon a beginning that offers little certainty, a reminder that even the most imposing creatures once passed through a period where their presence in the world was small, and their chances depended on conditions that favored others just as much. In a layer of ancient sediment in what is now India, a moment rests with unusual clarity, its details arranged in a way that leaves little to interpretation. The bones of a small snake lie intertwined with the remains of a hatchling, their positions preserved as they were when the surrounding material closed over them. Nearby, fragments of eggshell curve around the scene, part of a nesting ground that once held many more beginnings like this one. The snake is known as Sanajay, a species whose form differs from the larger constrictors familiar today. Its jaws were not built to open wide enough to take in substantial prey, yet its presence here suggests a different strategy. The association between its body, the broken shell, and the young dinosaur is not incidental. The alignment of these elements indicates contact at the earliest stage of life, when size and mobility had not yet developed into protection. Fossils that capture behavior are rare, and those that show interactions between different kinds of animals are rarer still. In this case, the arrangement provides direct evidence that a non-dinosaur predator was exploiting a dinosaur nesting site. It is not inferred from scattered bones or distant marks, but preserved in place, a record of proximity and timing that reveals how such encounters could unfold. The significance lies not in scale, but in specificity, a clear example of a small predator engaging with a much larger lineage at its most vulnerable point. The nesting ground itself adds to this understanding. Multiple eggs, arranged together, suggest a repeated use of the site, a place where generations began under similar conditions. For an animal like Sanaja, such a location would offer opportunity not through strength, but through predictability. The eggs would be present in clusters, the hatchlings emerging within a limited window, their movements slow and uncoordinated. The environment provided a setting where patience could replace force. There is a quiet precision in this interaction. The snake did not need to confront an adult or compete across open terrain. It operated within a narrow interval, arriving when the balance favored its design. Its body, slender and flexible, allowed it to move among the eggs without disturbing the entire site. Its bite, though limited by jaw size, was sufficient for prey at this stage. Each aspect of its form aligned with a specific moment in the life cycle of its target. This fossil reshapes how such relationships are understood. It shifts attention away from the idea that danger must always come from equally large or imposing forms. Instead, it highlights the importance of timing, of knowing when a lineage is most exposed. The scale of the predator becomes less relevant than its ability to intersect with that moment. A small body, placed correctly in space and time, can have an impact disproportionate to its size. Within the broader pattern, this example adds a layer of detail that complements the traces seen elsewhere. It provides a direct link between the concept of vulnerability and the physical evidence of interaction. The hatchling, still close to the shell that held it, represents a stage where the future of a much larger animal depended on surviving its first encounter with the surrounding world. The scene does not carry the force of a dramatic confrontation. It unfolds within the quiet of a nesting ground, shaped by routine and repetition. Yet within that quiet, the conditions align in a way that reveals a consistent truth. The most effective threats are not always the largest or the most visible. Sometimes they are the ones that arrive without urgency, guided by patterns that repeat across generations, acting with a precision that leaves only a small, preserved moment as evidence. Within the narrow interval between shell and first movement, a life exists at its smallest scale, contained within a body that has not yet expanded into the form it will one day carry. Bones are thin, joints still settling into alignment, muscles untested against the demands of the wider world. In this brief phase, the proportions that will later define strength remain compressed, offering little resistance to anything that arrives at the same moment. For a snake such as Sanaja, this stage presents a precise opportunity. Its skull, unlike that of later giant constrictors, did not open wide enough to engulf large prey. The structure of its jaws limited the size of what it could consume, shaping its role not around overpowering substantial animals, but around selecting targets that matched its physical constraints. Hatchlings, emerging from their shells, fit within that boundary. Their size aligned with the capacity of the predator, allowing an interaction that required neither speed across distance nor force beyond its design. The relationship between predator and prey here is defined not by scale alone, but by timing. A dinosaur lineage may eventually produce individuals of immense size, yet each begins at a point where that future has not yet unfolded. The difference between these stages is not gradual in the sense of immediate protection. Growth takes time, and during that time, the animal remains within a range where other forms can act upon it. The vulnerability is built into the sequence of development itself. Nesting sites reinforce this pattern through repetition. The conditions that lead to successful incubation also create consistency in when and where hatchlings appear. Temperature, sediment, and placement combine to produce a predictable cycle. For a predator attuned to these rhythms, the environment offers signals that can be followed without the need for constant search. The arrival does not need to be hurried. It can be timed to coincide with the moment when the shells begin to open, when movement is limited and coordination has not yet formed. Within this setting, the actions of the snake unfold with a measured efficiency. Its body moves through the nesting area with minimal disturbance, guided by chemical cues and subtle shifts in the ground. There is no need to challenge the larger forms that may be present at other times. The interaction is confined to a window where the balance favors the smaller animal. Each movement is directed toward a specific outcome, one that has been repeated across seasons as long as the conditions remain stable. The contrast between what the hatchling is and what it will become is contained within this moment. A form that will later traverse wide landscapes exists here as a small, newly emerged body, its future dependent on surviving encounters that do not resemble those it will face as an adult. The difference is not only in size, but in capability, in the ability to respond, to move, to avoid. This pattern extends beyond a single species of snake. It represents a broader principle within the ecosystem, where different organisms align their behaviors with particular stages in the life cycles of others. The nesting ground becomes a point of convergence, a place where multiple timelines intersect, each with its own rhythm and requirement. As this understanding settles, the focus shifts from the image of a fully grown dinosaur to the earlier phase that precedes it. The risks present at that stage are not incidental. They are part of the structure of life in this world, shaping which individuals continue and which do not. In that quiet interval, as shells give way and movement begins, the presence of a patient predator reveals how much depends on a moment measured in hours, where the smallest form carries the weight of what it may become, and where the outcome is influenced by others that have learned to wait. In a slab of stone from northeastern China, a small body lies curled with something unusual held inside it. The outline is unmistakably mammalian, compact, furred in life, built with the proportions of an animal that would pass quickly beneath the notice of larger forms. Yet within its ribcage, preserved among the remains of its last meal, are fragments of a young dinosaur, identified as Spidocosaurus, a species that would grow into a much larger and more recognizable shape. The mammal is known as Repenomamus robustus. Its size sets it apart from the earliest expectations of its kind, larger than many other mammals of the time, with a skull and dentition suited to processing substantial food. The evidence contained within its body provides something rare, a direct link between predator and prey, not inferred from scattered traces, but enclosed within the animal itself. The bones of the juvenile dinosaur, partially digested, indicate that this interaction was not incidental. It represents consumption, a completed act rather than a possibility. For a long period, mammals of the Mesozoic were often imagined as minor participants, small creatures moving in the margins, avoiding contact with the dominant reptiles that defined the era. This fossil alters that picture. It shows that at least some mammals occupied roles that involved active predation or scavenging on dinosaur young. Their presence was not limited to the background. They were part of the same network of interactions, engaging directly with other lineages when conditions allowed. The size of the prey is important here. Psittacosaurus, though known from larger individuals, began life at a scale that could be managed by a predator, such as Repenomamus. The difference between adult and juvenile stages creates a range within which various predators can operate. The mammal did not need to contend with a fully grown dinosaur. It engaged with a younger individual, one whose body had not yet reached the proportions that would later define it. This interaction introduces a reversal that shifts the familiar image of the Mesozoic. Instead of large reptiles dominating all others, a mammal appears as the consumer, holding within its body the remains of a dinosaur. The contrast is not exaggerated, nor is it framed as an exception that overturns the entire structure of the ecosystem. It is a specific instance that broadens the understanding of how different groups interacted, revealing that roles were more varied than once assumed. The anatomy of Repenomamus supports this interpretation. Its jaws were robust, its teeth capable of slicing and crushing, suggesting a diet that included vertebrate prey. Its limbs indicate a body built for movement across the ground, able to pursue or capture animals within its size range. These features align with the evidence found within its ribcage, forming a consistent picture of an animal adapted to more than passive survival. Within the broader pattern, this fossil adds another layer to the map of vulnerability. It shows that the early stages of dinosaur life were not only exposed to reptiles and other archosaurs, but also to mammals that shared the same environments. The interactions between these groups were shaped by size, timing, and opportunity, rather than by a strict hierarchy that placed one above all others. The presence of a mammal consuming a dinosaur challenges a simplified view of the past. It replaces it with a more detailed arrangement, where different lineages intersected in ways that do not always align with expectation. In this arrangement, the boundaries between predator and prey shift depending on circumstance, and even the smallest participants can hold a role that influences the outcome of another's beginning. Another specimen from the same region adds a different kind of clarity, one that rests not inside a rib cage, but in the arrangement of two bodies caught in direct contact. Preserved within fine sediment, a mammal and a dinosaur lie together in a position that suggests movement interrupted rather than life at rest. The mammal, again identified as Repenomamus, is positioned above Acidicosaurus, its limbs placed in a way that indicates pressure and control. The alignment of their skeletons does not resemble chance accumulation. It reflects an interaction halted at a precise moment. The posture itself carries much of the meaning. The mammal's forelimbs appear braced against the dinosaur's body, while its head is oriented toward the neck and upper torso, a placement consistent with a biting action. The dinosaur lies beneath, its limbs drawn inward, its position constrained by the weight above. There is no indication of prolonged transport or scavenging after death. Instead, the configuration suggests immediacy, as if the scene was fixed during the act of engagement, before either animal could shift away. Such fossils are uncommon. Most of what remains from deep time is separated by distance or rearranged by processes that follow death. Bones become disarticulated, scattered, or compressed without preserving the relationships that once existed between living bodies. To find two animals in direct physical contact with positions that reflect behavior rather than coincidence is rare enough to draw careful attention. Each detail must be examined, compared, and tested against other possibilities, ensuring that the interpretation rests on the strongest available evidence. In this case, the consistency of the arrangement supports the conclusion that the mammal was engaged in an active attack. The grip suggested by the forelimbs, the orientation of the jaws, and the absence of displacement all point toward a moment of predation interrupted. The sediment that surrounds them likely arrived quickly, covering both animals before further movement could alter their positions. What remains is a snapshot of interaction, preserved with unusual fidelity. This finding extends the earlier evidence in a meaningful way. The presence of dinosaur remains within a mammal's digestive system shows consumption, but the posture of this pair suggests the act that preceded it. Together, they form a sequence, from encounter to outcome, that clarifies the role some mammals played within their environments. It becomes evident that these interactions were not limited to passive feeding on remains, but included direct engagement with living prey. The size of the dinosaur in this scene reinforces the pattern already emerging. Psittacosaurus, though capable of reaching a more substantial form, appears here at a stage where it could be subdued by a predator of this scale. The difference between juvenile and adult remains central, shaping which interactions are possible and which are not. The mammal does not challenge the fully grown version of its prey. It meets the animal at a point where its own anatomy provides an advantage. There is a quiet weight to this image. It does not rely on spectacle or exaggeration. Instead, it offers a precise record of contact, one that fits within the broader structure of the ecosystem. It shows that the relationships between mammals and dinosaurs included moments of direct predation, grounded in the realities of size, timing, and opportunity. Within this preserved encounter, the boundaries between expectation and evidence shift. The familiar image of small mammals moving unseen beneath larger forms gives way to a more complex arrangement, where roles overlap and interactions vary. The stone holds both animals together, not as symbols, but as participants in a shared moment, their positions aligned in a way that reveals how even within a world of giants, the outcome of a single encounter could depend on scale, posture, and the brief convergence of two lives. Along certain ancient channels, the sediment records a pattern of interruption, long tracks that approach the water and then fade without continuation. The surface changes at that boundary, impressions becoming less distinct, then vanishing altogether. In these spaces, the late Cretaceous holds the presence of Deinosuchus, a crocodilian whose scale and structure place it among the largest ambush predators of its time. Its body extended to lengths that rivaled many terrestrial animals, supported by a low, broad frame built for stability near water. The skull was massive, reinforced by thick bone, with teeth arranged to grip and hold rather than slice. Each tooth left a distinct mark, rounded and deep, capable of pressing into bone with considerable force. The limbs were strong yet short, suited for positioning rather than pursuit, allowing the animal to remain close to the edge where land met water. This placement defines its role. Deinosuchus did not rely on movement across open ground. It occupied the narrow zone where animals came to drink, to cross, or to follow the contours of a river's course. The water provided concealment, its surface masking the outline beneath. Only a portion of the head needed to remain above, eyes and nostrils aligned to observe without revealing the full body. In this position, stillness became an advantage, reducing the chance of detection. Fossil evidence supports its interaction with dinosaurs. Bones attributed to various species bear marks that correspond to the teeth of Deinosuchus, indentations and fractures that match the size and shape expected from its jaws. These traces confirm that contact occurred, that the bodies of dinosaurs entered into the feeding range of this predator. The marks remain as physical records, each one indicating a moment when bone met tooth under force. There is a necessary caution in interpreting these signs. A bite mark demonstrates that feeding took place, but it does not always reveal the full context of that feeding. The animal may have captured living prey, or it may have consumed remains that were already available. The distinction is not always preserved in the fossil record. Sediment, time, and the processes that follow death can obscure the sequence of events, leaving only the evidence of contact. Even within this uncertainty, the implications are clear. Whether through active predation or opportunistic feeding, Deinosuchus engaged with animals that approached the water's edge. Its size and strength placed it within a range where it could interact with large bodies, not limited to small or juvenile forms. The environment in which it lived allowed it to apply that strength under conditions that favored its design. At the riverbank, the balance of power shifts. The firm support of land gives way to softer ground, and the proximity of water alters movement. An animal accustomed to open terrain may find its footing less certain, its reactions slightly delayed. In contrast, a crocodilian positioned within the water operates within its preferred medium, where resistance and buoyancy support rapid action at close range. This difference does not require a prolonged struggle. A sudden movement from below the surface, driven by the force of a large body and the leverage of powerful jaws, can redirect another animal before it fully registers the change. The encounter is shaped by location as much as by size, by the specific conditions that define the edge between environments. Within this setting, the presence of Deinosuchus illustrates a broader truth about the late Cretaceous landscape. Large dinosaurs moving near water were not alone in their dominance. The boundary they approached belonged to another kind of predator, one whose advantages emerged precisely where the ground began to give way. A boundary is not only a line on a landscape, it is a shift in the rules that govern movement. Where firm ground softens and water begins to hold weight, The relationship between body and environment changes in subtle ways. Force is distributed differently, balance becomes less certain, and the timing of each step is altered by resistance that does not exist on dry land. In such places, the advantages carried across open terrain can lose their clarity. Ambush predators make use of this transition with precision. Rather than confronting another animal within its preferred conditions, they remain within an environment that reshapes the interaction before it begins. Water supports part of their mass, allowing a large body to remain partially hidden without expending energy. The surface conceals depth, masking the exact position from which movement will originate. When the moment arrives, the stored energy of muscle is released across a short distance, amplified by the medium through which it moves. Footing plays a central role in this exchange. An animal approaching the edge may not register the change immediately. The ground, softened by moisture, offers less friction. A step that would normally provide stability instead shifts slightly, redirecting weight and slowing the response. This delay, even if brief, alters the sequence of events. The body requires a fraction of time to correct its position, and within that fraction, the conditions favor the animal already adapted to the terrain. Mud adds another layer to this interaction. It resists movement in a way that is uneven, gripping at the surface of the foot while yielding beneath it. The effort required to lift and place each limb increases, reducing the efficiency of motion. In contrast, a predator positioned within water encounters a different kind of resistance, one that it is built to navigate. Its limbs and tail work together to generate force, pushing against a medium that supports rather than destabilizes. Water depth determines how much of each body is engaged in this exchange. Shallow conditions allow a concealed approach while still providing enough support for rapid movement. Deeper areas increase buoyancy, reducing the effect of gravity on the predator while increasing it on the animal entering the water. The difference in how each body interacts with depth becomes part of the outcome, shaping which movements are possible and which are constrained. Surprise completes this alignment of factors. Visibility at the boundary is often limited by reflections and surface disturbance. An animal on land relies on sight and sound in ways that may not translate fully into this setting. The predator, already positioned within the water, reduces its profile until the final moment. When it moves, the distance is short, the direction direct, and the force concentrated. This pattern can be observed in living crocodilians, whose behavior reflects the same principles. They remain still near the edge, their bodies aligned with the surface, waiting for an animal to enter the range where these conditions apply. The interaction does not depend on a prolonged pursuit. It is shaped by the environment itself, which alters the balance before contact occurs. Within this framework, body mass alone does not determine the outcome. A larger animal may carry greater strength, yet that strength must be applied under conditions that do not always allow it to be expressed. At the boundary, the environment redistributes advantage, favoring the animal whose form matches the setting. The riverbank becomes a place where roles can shift quickly, where an herbivore or even a predator moving from one medium into another enters a space defined by different constraints. In this space, the principles of movement, resistance, and timing combine to create a brief interval where the balance of power is not fixed, but shaped by the ground beneath and the water beside it. Across a different stretch of time, in river systems that spread through what is now northern Africa, another immense form lay within the margins of water, its presence marked not by a single site, but by a pattern repeated across wide regions. Sarcosuchus, a crocodiliform of remarkable size, carried a skull that extended forward with a heavy, elongated profile, its jaws lined with teeth designed to seize and hold. The body behind that skull followed the same low, powerful outline, built for stability and sudden force within a semi-aquatic life. Its scale alone invites comparison, yet its importance lies not in singularity, but in recurrence. Sarcosuchus is one expression of a broader tendency, a design that appears again and again across the span of the Mesozoic. In different continents and at different times, crocodiliforms reached substantial sizes while occupying similar ecological positions. The details of each species vary, yet the overall pattern remains consistent. A large predator positioned at the interface of land and water, waiting within a narrow zone where movement slows and visibility shifts. This repetition suggests that the conditions supporting such animals were not rare. Riverbanks, floodplains, and shallow channels provided stable environments where these forms could persist. Large herbivores and other animals moved through these areas as part of their daily or seasonal routines, drawn by the presence of water or the vegetation that grew nearby. Each visit created an interaction between body and environment, a moment where the characteristics of the terrain influenced how movement unfolded. Sarcosuchus did not need to pursue prey across open ground to maintain its role. Its advantage emerged from positioning, from occupying a place where other animals would arrive on their own. The structure of its jaws, combined with the strength of its body, allowed it to exert force over a short distance, guided by timing rather than endurance. The water supported part of its mass, reducing the effort required to remain concealed, while also providing the medium through which it could move with sudden acceleration. Evidence for direct interaction with specific dinosaur species remains limited, and caution is necessary when interpreting the full range of its behavior. The fossil record provides fragments, not complete narratives, and each fragment must be considered within its context. Yet the broader ecological picture offers insight into the opportunities that would have existed. Wherever large animals approached the water's edge, the presence of a predator adapted to that setting introduced a possibility that did not depend on constant confrontation, but on alignment with the moment. This alignment reflects a deeper principle within the history of life. When similar environmental conditions persist, they tend to produce similar solutions. The repeated emergence of large crocodiliforms alongside dinosaurs illustrates this process, showing how certain designs remain effective across long periods. The combination of body form, habitat, and behavior creates a stable pattern, one that can reappear in different contexts without requiring a direct connection between species. The atmosphere of these environments carries a quiet tension. The water appears calm, the shoreline unchanged, yet beneath that surface lies a form shaped by generations of adaptation to this exact setting. The stillness is not empty. It is part of the strategy, a condition that allows the predator to remain present without drawing attention. Within this recurring pattern, the presence of Sarcosuchus becomes less an isolated case and more a continuation of a theme. The edges of water, across many landscapes and many times, supported animals built to take advantage of the same set of conditions. The result is a world where such predators are not exceptions, but expected inhabitants of a particular boundary, their forms echoing across ages as long as the environments that sustain them endure. At certain horizons, a vertical shape interrupts the line of low vegetation, not a tree and not a moving herd, but a figure that rises on folded wings and long limbs, its presence defined as much by height as by motion. In the late Cretaceous, this form belonged to age-darked pterosaurs, a group that included some of the largest animals ever to take flight. Among them, Quetzalcoatlus stands as one of the most striking examples, its wings spanning distances that rival the width of small aircraft, its body supported by structures refined for both air and land. The ability to fly at such scale required a balance of strength and lightness. Hollow bones reduced weight while maintaining rigidity, and broad wings captured air currents that could carry the animal across great distances with measured effort. Yet flight was only one part of its existence. The anatomy of these pterosaurs suggests that they were not confined to the sky. Their limbs, when grounded, positioned the body high above the surface, creating a stance that would have been imposing even without the extension of wings. Standing on the ground, an azodarchid could reach heights comparable to large terrestrial animals, its head held forward on a long, flexible neck. The skull itself was elongated and narrow, ending in a pointed beak that lacked teeth but retained a precise shape suited to grasping and probing. This combination of height, reach, and beak form creates an image that differs from the simplified idea of pterosaurs as distant flyers, small against the sky and detached from the world below. Their movement across land has been reconstructed from trackways that show a steady, deliberate gait. The wings, when folded, became part of a four-limbed stance, supporting the body in a way that distributed weight effectively. Each step placed the animal within the same space as other terrestrial forms, not as a passing shadow, but as a participant in the environment. The transition between air and ground did not diminish their presence. It expanded it, allowing them to occupy both domains with different advantages. This dual capability reshapes how their role is understood. In the air, they could travel, observe, and locate areas of interest across wide regions. On the ground, they could approach, investigate, and interact with objects or animals at a scale that matched their height. The long neck provided reach, allowing the head to move independently of the body, extending forward or downward with controlled precision. The beak, narrow and pointed, functioned as an instrument for contact, capable of quick, targeted action. For smaller animals, including young dinosaurs, the presence of such a figure introduces a different kind of interaction. The height alone would allow the pterosaur to survey its surroundings, its head elevated above obstacles that might conceal smaller bodies. The reach of the neck could bring the beak into contact without requiring the entire body to move close. This combination of observation and extension creates a mode of engagement that does not rely on speed across distance, but on positioning and accuracy. The image that emerges is not one of a distant silhouette drifting across the sky, but of a large, grounded animal moving with purpose through open spaces. Its wings, when extended, define its capacity for flight, yet when folded, they frame a body that remains fully present within the landscape. The distinction between air and land becomes less rigid, with the pterosaur bridging both in a way that expands its influence. Within this broader view, the role of giant pterosaurs becomes more complex. They are not reduced to a single function or setting. Their form allows them to move between environments, carrying their size and structure into each. The result is a presence that can appear above and among other animals, its height and reach shaping interactions in ways that are not immediately apparent from the sky alone. On certain plains, where vegetation grows low and the horizon remains wide and uninterrupted, a tall figure moves with a measured pace, its shadow stretching ahead before its body fully arrives. The form is familiar from above, yet here it advances across the ground, each step deliberate, each pause aligned with a subtle shift in attention. The same anatomy that carries it through the air now defines its presence on land, translating flight into a different kind of reach. The structure of giant ajdarchids suggests more than passive landing and takeoff. Their limbs, proportioned for a stable four-limbed stance, allow them to move efficiently across open surfaces. Trackways indicate a stride that is neither hurried nor hesitant, but steady, with weight distributed in a way that minimizes strain. The wings, folded along the sides, become supportive elements rather than obstacles, contributing to a body plan that functions well beyond flight. Their necks extend forward with a range that exceeds that of most terrestrial animals, supported by vertebrae designed to balance length with control. At the end of this extension, the head carries a long, pointed beak, an instrument shaped for precise contact rather than broad force. This arrangement creates a system where the body can remain at a distance while the head reaches into the space ahead, allowing interaction without the need for full commitment of movement. Such a design invites interpretation. Some researchers have suggested that these animals may have been effective hunters on land, using their height and reach to locate and capture smaller prey. The idea rests on biomechanics and comparison, on how the parts of the body align with potential behaviors. The long neck could probe or strike, the beak could grasp, and the elevated stance could provide a vantage point over low vegetation. At the same time, the evidence does not fix a single role for all members of this group. Fossils preserve bones and tracks, but not the full range of actions that once accompanied them. It is possible that different species, or even individuals within a species, varied in how they used their anatomy. Some may have focused on small animals, others on different sources of food. The interpretation remains grounded in what the structure allows rather than in a complete record of every behavior. Within this uncertainty, the image of a ground-stalking pterosaur remains compelling because it aligns with the physical possibilities suggested by the bones. Across an open flat, such an animal would move with a quiet presence, its height setting it apart from the surrounding forms. The head would tilt and adjust, scanning not through rapid motion, but through careful placement, each movement measured against the terrain. When an opportunity arises, the action would be brief. The neck extends, the beak descends, and contact is made within a confined space. The body remains largely in place, its role to support the extension rather than to drive it forward. This method reduces the need for speed across distance, replacing it with accuracy at close range. For smaller dinosaurs and other animals sharing this environment, the presence of such a figure introduces a form of interaction that differs from both aerial and purely terrestrial predators. It is neither a distant threat from above nor a pursuing force across the ground. It is a combination of both, a height that observes and a reach that engages. In this setting, the boundary between sky and land becomes less distinct. The same animal that can rise into the air can also walk among the grass, its form adapting to each context without losing its identity. The result is a presence that moves through multiple layers of the environment, its shadow sometimes cast from above, and at other times extending across the ground as it advances. Within a piece of amber no larger than a fingertip, an entire interaction is held in place, suspended in a clarity that outlasted the forest it once belonged to. The surface glows with a muted warmth, and inside it, a small form clings to a cluster of fine filaments, each strand preserved in delicate detail. The filaments are feathers, not detached and drifting, but still arranged as they once lay upon a living body. Along them, a tick remains fixed, its mouthparts embedded where they had been placed, long before the resin hardened. These specimens date to roughly 99 million years ago, and they offer a rare window into a kind of relationship that almost never survives the passage of time. Soft-bodied organisms leave few traces, and the interactions between parasite and host are even less likely to be captured. Amber, formed from tree resin that flowed and then solidified, creates an exception to this pattern. It can preserve minute details, holding both the parasite and the feathers together in a way that allows their association to be seen directly. The tick itself belongs to a lineage that still exists today, its structure recognizable despite the distance in time. Its body is compact, built for attachment, with specialized mouthparts that pierce the surface and draw blood. The feathers it rests upon show signs of damage, areas where the structure has been altered or degraded, suggesting that feeding and movement occurred repeatedly. The combination of these elements indicates a sustained interaction, not a brief contact, but a presence that extended over time. This evidence expands the understanding of what constituted risk in the lives of feathered dinosaurs. It introduces a form of pressure that does not rely on size or force, but on persistence. A parasite does not need to overcome its host in a single moment. It remains, drawing small amounts of blood, creating irritation that may alter behavior or energy use. The effects are gradual, accumulating rather than striking all at once. There is also the possibility of additional consequences, though the record does not preserve them directly. In modern ecosystems, ticks can act as vectors for pathogens, carrying microorganisms between hosts. The presence of ticks in the Cretaceous suggests that similar pathways may have existed, yet without direct evidence of disease in these specific cases. Such connections remain cautious considerations rather than confirmed facts. What is certain is the act of feeding itself, preserved in position and structure. The scale of this interaction contrasts with the larger encounters already seen. Here, the difference lies in proximity and duration. The parasite remains close to the body, its impact measured in small increments rather than immediate outcomes. The feathers, often associated with display or insulation, become part of a microhabitat, a place where other organisms can live and feed. This introduces a layer of complexity that is not visible in skeletal remains alone. In this intimate setting, the boundaries between host and environment blur. The body of the dinosaur supports not only its own functions, but also those of smaller organisms that depend on it. The presence of the tick, preserved with such precision, reveals a relationship that would have been common yet rarely recorded, a quiet interaction that unfolded alongside more visible events. The amber holds this moment without motion, allowing it to be observed long after both participants have disappeared. Within its clarity, the scale of danger shifts once more, showing that not all threats are defined by sudden encounters. Some are embedded in the smallest details of life, persistent and close, acting in ways that leave only the faintest traces, unless chance preserves them in a form that can be seen again. Inside another fragment of amber, the scene shifts from attachment to erosion, from blood drawn in hidden intervals to the slow wearing down of structure itself. Fine strands lie pressed against the surface of the resin, their delicate branching patterns preserved with unusual clarity. Along these strands, small insects are caught in place, their bodies positioned among the barbs and filaments in a way that suggests they were not merely passing by. The feathers show irregular edges, portions thinned or broken, as if something had been feeding directly on them. These specimens date to the mid-Cretaceous, and they provide evidence of feather-feeding behavior among insects that lived alongside dinosaurs. The insects are not adapted for piercing skin or extracting fluids, but for consuming the material of the feather itself. Keratin, the substance that forms feathers, is durable, yet not immune to being broken down by organisms equipped to process it. The presence of these insects within the feather structure indicates that such feeding was not occasional, but part of a consistent interaction. This relationship adds another layer to the understanding of how feathers functioned in life. They are often considered in terms of insulation, display, or aerodynamic use, yet these fossils reveal that they also formed a microenvironment. Within the dense arrangement of filaments, small spaces existed where insects could move, feed, and remain partially concealed. The body of the dinosaur, rather than being a closed surface, supported a community of smaller organisms that interacted with it in ongoing ways. Damage to feathers carries consequences beyond the immediate loss of material. The structure of a feather depends on the integrity of its barbs and barbules, the fine connections that maintain its shape. When these are disrupted, the feather may lose some of its effectiveness, whether in retaining heat, maintaining form, or performing other roles. The feeding activity of insects, though minute in scale, can accumulate over time, altering the condition of the covering across the body. This introduces a different kind of pressure, one that does not resolve quickly. Unlike a single encounter that ends in a moment, this interaction persists, repeating in small increments. Each bite removes a fragment, each movement shifts the structure slightly. The effect is gradual, spreading across days and seasons, shaping the condition of the animal in ways that may influence how it moves, how it regulates its temperature, or how it presents itself within its environment. The amber captures these details with precision, allowing the relationship to be seen rather than inferred. The insects remain positioned within the feathers, their presence fixed at the point where they were feeding. The damage to the filaments aligns with their location, forming a direct connection between organism and effect. This clarity is rare, as such interactions usually leave little trace once the soft materials decay. Through this evidence, the experience of a living dinosaur becomes more immediate. The body is not only a structure moving through space, but a surface that supports other forms of life. Feathers, extending outward, create a boundary that is both protective and inhabited. Within that boundary, small organisms carry out their own processes, drawing from the material available to them. The scale of these interactions contrasts with the larger patterns already described, yet it holds equal significance in shaping daily life. The presence of feather-feeding insects suggests a constant background of minor disturbance, a condition where the body is subject to ongoing change at a fine level. In this setting, the experience of existence includes not only movement and growth, but also the gradual effects of being part of a larger network where even the smallest participants leave their mark through repeated contact. Inclusions of delicate wings and slender bodies appear in amber with a clarity that preserves even the fine veins along their surfaces. Among these forms are early representatives of blood-feeding insects, lineages related to mosquitoes and their relatives, their mouthparts adapted for piercing and drawing fluid. The resin that captured them once flowed through forests, where feathered and non-feathered dinosaurs moved among trees and open spaces, carrying with them a resource that required no pursuit across distance, only proximity and timing. These insects are small, easily overlooked in comparison to the larger animals that shared their environment, yet their presence marks a different kind of interaction. The structure of their mouthparts indicates a feeding strategy that depends on accessing blood beneath the surface. In modern ecosystems, such insects locate hosts through a combination of cues, including heat, movement, and chemical signals. While the exact sensory details of Cretaceous species remain uncertain, their anatomy suggests a similar reliance on close-range detection and brief contact. Fossil evidence confirms that these insects existed during the time of dinosaurs, but it does not provide direct proof of disease transmission between them and their hosts. The preservation of pathogens requires a level of detail that amber rarely captures, and even when microorganisms are present, linking them to specific effects in ancient animals is difficult. As a result, the connection between these insects and illness in non-avian dinosaurs remains a possibility rather than a demonstrated fact. What can be established with confidence is the act of feeding itself and the conditions that follow from it. When blood-feeding insects are part of an environment, they introduce a continuous interaction that does not depend on a single event. Each contact is brief, yet repeated over time, creating a pattern that shapes daily experience. The skin or feathered surface becomes a point of access, a place where the boundary between body and environment is crossed in small increments. Irritation accompanies this process. The act of piercing and feeding can trigger responses that draw attention to the site, leading to movement or behavior aimed at dislodging the insect. This response, though minor in isolation, may occur repeatedly, influencing how an animal rests, feeds, or moves through its surroundings. The loss of blood in each instance is small, yet over many interactions, it represents a measurable transfer of energy from host to parasite. The presence of these insects also establishes potential pathways for the movement of microorganisms, even if the specifics cannot be traced in the fossil record. In modern systems, such pathways are well documented, with insects carrying agents from one host to another. In the Cretaceous, the same ecological principle would have been present, embedded within the interactions between species. The details remain beyond direct observation, yet the framework exists as part of the environment. This form of pressure differs from the encounters that occur at larger scales. It does not resolve in a moment of capture or escape. Instead, it persists, woven into the fabric of daily life, acting in ways that are often subtle but continuous. The effect is cumulative, shaping the condition of the host over time rather than through a single, decisive event. Within this quiet dynamic, the meaning of danger expands. It includes not only the visible interactions that leave clear marks in bone, but also the smaller, repeated contacts that rarely fossilize. The insects preserved in amber offer a glimpse into this aspect of the past, showing that alongside the larger forces already described, there existed a constant, low-level exchange between bodies, one that operated without spectacle, yet remained an enduring part of the world in which dinosaurs lived. Beyond the last line of firm ground, where the shore dissolves into open water, the continuity of land life gives way to a different arrangement, one that follows its own rules and carries its own history. The surface may appear as a simple extension of the world already known, yet beneath it lies a system that developed along a separate path, shaped by pressures that do not apply on land. Here, the presence of dinosaurs ends, not because the time has changed, but because the environment no longer supports their form. Dinosaurs were terrestrial animals, adapted to move across solid ground, to breathe air, and to interact with landscapes defined by soil, vegetation, and climate. While some may have approached water or lived near its margins, they did not occupy the oceans themselves. The large marine reptiles, often associated with this era, though contemporary with dinosaurs, belong to entirely different lineages. Their resemblance in scale or appearance does not place them within the same group. They evolved separately, adapting to a medium that required different solutions. Within the oceans of the Mesozoic, these marine reptiles became the dominant large vertebrates. Their bodies were shaped for propulsion through water, with limbs transformed into paddles and tails adapted for efficient movement. Their senses and feeding strategies aligned with conditions where visibility, pressure, and temperature varied with depth. This environment supported its own hierarchies, its own interactions, independent of the dynamics unfolding on land. At the shoreline, these two worlds meet without merging. A large dinosaur standing at the edge of the water remains part of the terrestrial system even as it approaches the boundary of another. The ground beneath its feet still supports its weight, yet only a few steps away, the conditions shift entirely. The water carries its own inhabitants, adapted to detect movement and respond within a medium that favors different forms of motion. The transition from land to sea introduces a change in scale that is not immediately visible from the surface. Depth extends downward, creating layers where light diminishes and pressure increases. Movement becomes three-dimensional, allowing predators to approach from directions that do not exist on land. The absence of fixed footing alters how force is applied, how bodies accelerate, and how interactions unfold. These differences shape a system where familiarity with land offers little guidance. Within this setting, the concept of dominance shifts again. A form that commands space on land does not carry that authority into water. The structures that support its movement become less effective, while the inhabitants of the ocean operate within conditions that enhance their abilities. The boundary between these environments marks a point where the balance of power changes, not gradually, but immediately upon entry. The marine reptiles that inhabited these waters filled roles that parallel those of large predators on land, yet their adaptations allowed them to exploit a wider range of depths and directions. Their presence created a network of interactions that extended far beyond the shoreline, shaping ecosystems that remained largely separate from terrestrial life. As the perspective moves outward, the sense of continuity gives way to contrast. The land, with its varied terrains and visible inhabitants, transitions into an expanse where much remains unseen beneath the surface. The calm appearance of the sea conceals a system defined by different constraints, where size, speed, and perception operate under altered conditions. At this boundary, the world divides into adjoining realms, each complete within itself, each governed by its own set of relationships. The shore becomes a point of contact, a place where one system ends and another begins, not as an extension, but as a separate domain with its own rulers and its own quiet complexities. Far from the shifting edges of shore, the open water carries a continuity that reaches back beyond the rise of dinosaurs, into a time when life was still recovering from a profound disruption. After the end Permian crisis, when many lineages vanished and ecosystems were formed, a group of reptiles entered the oceans and began to change in ways that would reshape marine life. These were the ichthyosaurs, bodies gradually refined into forms that matched the demands of constant movement through water. Their transformation was extensive. Limbs that once supported weight on land became paddles, flattened and aligned for propulsion. The body narrowed into a streamlined shape, reducing resistance as it moved forward. A strong tail, often crescent-shaped, provided thrust, driving the animal through the water with a rhythm that could be sustained over distance. Eyes grew large, adapted for detecting movement and light in environments where clarity varied. Each feature reflects an adjustment to a medium that rewards efficiency and precision. As these adaptations accumulated, Ichthyosaurs diversified into a range of sizes and forms. Some remained moderate in scale, while others reached lengths that placed them among the largest marine predators of their time. Their teeth, when present, were suited to grasping prey that moved quickly, and their speed allowed them to pursue animals that would be difficult to capture in slower systems. The structure of their bodies suggests a capacity for continuous swimming, an ability to cover wide areas of ocean in search of food. This development occurred early in the Mesozoic, long before many of the marine reptiles that would later dominate popular images of prehistoric seas. While dinosaurs were establishing themselves on land, ichthyosaurs were already occupying the oceans with a high degree of specialization. Their presence indicates that the marine environment had its own trajectory, one that did not wait for terrestrial changes to unfold before reaching complexity. The importance of this timing lies in the depth it adds to the understanding of marine ecosystems. Danger within the oceans did not emerge suddenly in a later period. It was present from the early stages of recovery, shaped by animals that adapted quickly to the available niches. The continuity of these predators across time suggests that once the conditions were set, similar roles would be filled repeatedly by different lineages. Movement defines the character of ichthyosaurs. Their bodies appear in fossils as smooth outlines, often preserved in a way that emphasizes their streamlined form. The absence of sharp angles or protruding structures allows them to pass through water with minimal disruption. This design supports a mode of life that is less about sudden ambush and more about sustained pursuit, tracking prey across open distances where concealment is limited. Within this setting, the ocean becomes a space where speed and endurance shape interactions. Prey must remain in motion, aware of predators that can match or exceed their pace. The absence of fixed boundaries allows encounters to occur across wide areas, with depth adding another dimension to movement. Ichthyosaurs operated within this three-dimensional space, adjusting their position vertically as well as horizontally, a capacity that expands the range of possible interactions. As the narrative moves through these waters, the presence of ichthyosaurs introduces a sense of continuity that extends beyond the rise of any single group. They represent an early chapter in a longer sequence, one that continues through different forms and periods. The oceans, shaped by these early adaptations, carried forward a structure where large predators were already established, their influence woven into the fabric of marine life long before later lineages appeared. Where the water deepens and the surface loses its connection to the patterns of shore, another set of forms moves with a different rhythm, long necks tracing slow arcs, compact heads adjusting with quiet precision. Among these are plesiosaurs, marine reptiles whose bodies took on a shape unlike those that came before them. Four limbs transformed into broad paddles, arranged not for walking, but for a style of swimming that relied on coordinated motion through water. Their movement was not driven by a single source of thrust, but by the combined action of these limbs, each stroke contributing to a smooth, controlled glide. The body remained relatively stable as the paddles worked in sequence, allowing for a form of propulsion that balanced efficiency with maneuverability. The long neck extended forward, increasing reach, while the head, small in proportion to the body, carried teeth suited for grasping prey that moved through the surrounding water. Alongside them, a different configuration appeared within the same broader group, one that shifted emphasis from extension to concentration of force. These were the pliosaurs, relatives that shared the same basic lineage yet diverged in their proportions. Their necks were shorter, their heads larger, and their jaws reinforced to deliver greater power. The paddles remained, supporting movement through water, but the balance of their anatomy placed more emphasis on capturing and processing larger or more resistant prey. Together, these forms illustrate a range of feeding strategies within marine reptiles rather than a single dominant template. Some extended their reach into the water column, selecting prey at a distance with precision. Others relied on strength and bite force, engaging more directly with what they encountered. This variation reflects the diversity of the marine environment itself, where different niches could be occupied by bodies adapted to specific modes of interaction. The ocean adjacent to dinosaur coastlines was not a simple extension of terrestrial life, but a domain where these specialized hunters operated according to different principles. Their senses, movement, and feeding strategies were shaped by the properties of water, where resistance, buoyancy, and three-dimensional space altered how encounters unfolded. A body that thrived on land would not necessarily translate its abilities into this setting, where the rules of motion and perception differ. Within this environment, plesiosaurs and pliosaurs occupied roles that complemented and contrasted with each other. The long neck of a plesiosaur allowed it to explore space ahead of its body, its head moving through water with minimal disturbance. The compact form of a pliosaur concentrated its capabilities, bringing force into a single point of contact. Both approaches proved effective within their respective contexts, each representing a solution to the challenges of hunting in open water. The presence of these animals adds another layer to the structure of prehistoric ecosystems. It shows that danger did not arise from a single kind of predator, but from a variety of forms, each adapted to a particular set of conditions. The ocean, like the land, supported multiple strategies, each interacting with the others in a network of relationships that extended across space and time. As these forms move through the water, their outlines remain distinct, yet connected by their shared ancestry. The elegance of their movement contrasts with the underlying function of their design, each motion aligned with the act of locating and capturing prey. The calm surface above conceals this activity, yet beneath it, the interactions continue, shaped by the diversity of forms that evolved to occupy this domain. In this setting, the idea of a single dominant predator gives way to a broader understanding. Opportunity within the environment leads to variation, and variation leads to multiple expressions of predation, each suited to a different way of moving, sensing, and engaging with the world below the surface. By the closing chapters of the Cretaceous, the oceans carried a different kind of presence, long bodies moving with a steady confidence that came from full commitment to life in water. Mosasaurs belonged to this moment, marine lizards whose ancestry traced back to land, yet whose forms had reshaped themselves into something entirely ocean-bound. Their limbs had become flippers, their tails extended into powerful strokes, and their bodies lengthened into flexible lines that could cut through open water with controlled force. They were not occasional visitors to the sea. Their bones show a life spent within it, their skeletons adapted to buoyancy and propulsion, their distribution stretching across ancient oceans that once connected continents now far apart. From shallow coastal regions to deeper offshore environments, mosasaurs occupied a wide range of habitats, appearing in fossil deposits from many parts of the world. Their presence was not isolated or rare, but repeated across time and geography, suggesting a group that had become deeply established within marine ecosystems. The structure of their jaws reveals much about how they lived. Teeth recurved and sharply edged line the mouth, designed not for grinding, but for seizing and holding. In some species, additional rows of teeth on the palate create a secondary grip, guiding prey inward once captured. This arrangement, combined with a flexible skull, allowed them to handle a variety of prey types. Evidence preserved within fossils supports this versatility. Stomach contents have been found containing fish, other marine reptiles, and fragments of animals that once shared the same waters. Bite marks on bones, matched to mosasaur dentition, show interactions that ranged from predation to scavenging, each trace offering a quiet record of contact. Such evidence does not always distinguish the exact nature of an encounter, yet the pattern remains consistent. These animals engaged with many forms of life, their feeding behavior broad rather than specialized toward a single target. This breadth reflects an ecological role that did not depend on narrow opportunities. Instead, mosasaurs appear to have moved through their environment as adaptable predators, capable of responding to whatever became available. Near the boundary where land meets sea, this presence acquires a particular clarity. A shoreline is not a fixed line, but a shifting interface, where movements from land extend briefly into water and then return. At this edge, the difference between environments becomes immediate. A large animal standing on firm ground retains its balance and awareness, yet a step forward alters the conditions beneath its body. Depth increases, footing changes, and visibility softens as water begins to surround and lift. Within that space, mosasaurs moved with ease. Their bodies were shaped for it, their senses attuned to signals carried through water. For any animal approaching the shoreline, the transition into this environment meant entering a domain already occupied by forms adapted to its demands. The scale of a terrestrial body, impressive on land, does not translate directly into advantage here. Instead, it becomes one element among many, subject to the constraints of buoyancy and movement within a denser medium. The fossil record, in its quiet fragments, allows these relationships to be inferred rather than declared. Teeth embedded in bone, partially digested remains, and the repeated appearance of mosasaurs alongside diverse prey all contribute to a picture of persistent interaction. It is not a single dramatic event that defines their role, but a pattern built over many encounters, each one adding to the structure of the ecosystem. In this setting, the ocean holds its own hierarchy, one that operates independently of what unfolds on land. The presence of mosasaurs illustrates that even at the height of dinosaur diversity, the waters beyond the shore were shaped by different rulers, their movements hidden beneath a surface that reveals very little of what lies below. A darker geometry moves beneath the surface, not defined by limbs or long necks, but by a steady outline that cuts forward with quiet efficiency. Sharks had been part of Earth's waters long before the first dinosaurs took shape, their lineage extending deep into earlier oceans where forms and ecosystems were already shifting. By the time the Cretaceous seas spread wide across the planet, these animals were not newcomers but enduring participants, refined through long spans of change. Among them, large species such as Cretoxorhina carried a presence that reflects both continuity and power. Their bodies were streamlined, shaped for sustained motion through open water, with tails that provided thrust and fins that stabilized each turn. The skeleton, built of cartilage rather than bone, left a different kind of record, yet their teeth endure in abundance, sharp, triangular, and serrated in ways that reveal their function. Each tooth was part of a system designed for replacement, rows moving forward as older ones were lost, ensuring that the cutting edge remained constant. These teeth appear in many places within the fossil record, sometimes isolated, sometimes associated with other remains. In certain cases, they are found embedded in bones of marine animals, marking points of contact that suggest feeding interactions. The shapes of these teeth, compared across specimens, allow paleontologists to identify the species responsible, connecting scattered evidence into a broader understanding of behavior. What emerges is not a single dramatic encounter, but a repeated pattern of engagement with other life in the ocean. Sharks did not occupy the seas alone. Their presence overlapped with that of other large predators, each shaped by different evolutionary paths. Marine reptiles moved through the same waters. Their bodies adapted in ways that contrasted with the form of a shark, yet their roles often intersected. This coexistence created an environment where multiple apex hunters shared space, each contributing to the structure of the ecosystem. Near ancient coastlines, this overlap becomes more pronounced. The edge of land and sea gathers movement from both directions, animals arriving to drink, to feed, or to pass between habitats. Beneath that surface, the water holds its own inhabitants, already in motion, already attuned to the signals carried through it. In such places, the presence of sharks adds another layer to the complexity, not replacing other predators, but joining them. The history of sharks shows a resilience that spans mass extinctions and environmental shifts. Their basic design, refined over time, proved adaptable to changing conditions. This persistence allowed them to remain a constant element within marine systems, even as other groups rose and declined. In the Cretaceous, they were part of a living network that included reptiles, fish, and countless smaller organisms, all interacting within a shared space. The sense of the ocean as a single domain gives way, here, to something more intricate. It is not governed by one dominant form, but shaped by the presence of many, each moving according to its own design. Sharks contribute to this pattern through their speed, their sensory abilities, and their capacity to locate and process prey within a vast and often opaque environment. As light fades with depth, outlines soften and distances become harder to judge. Movement continues, though it is less easily seen, carried by currents and by the steady propulsion of bodies adapted to this medium. Within that dim space, sharks pass through, their form both familiar and ancient, part of a lineage that has persisted through long stretches of Earth's history. In this layered environment, the idea of a single ruler becomes less useful. Instead, the sea holds a collection of presences, each capable in its own way, each interacting with the others. Sharks remain among them, not as an isolated force, but as one of several that together define the character of these ancient waters. At the meeting line between land and sea, the world gathers its movements into a narrow band where many needs converge at once. Water draws bodies toward it, not only for drinking, but for feeding, for cooling, for crossing from one place to another. The ground here softens, the slope shifts, and the surface reflects light in a way that conceals as much as it reveals. It is a place defined less by stability and more by transition, where each step changes the conditions beneath it. This edge becomes a point of accumulation. Tracks overlap in damp sediment, traces of different journeys crossing without meeting. Animals arrive from inland paths. Others approach from deeper water, each following patterns shaped by their own requirements. The shoreline holds all of these movements together, compressing them into a space where interactions become more likely, not through intention but through proximity. Within this narrow zone, different kinds of hunters operate according to different rules. Along the margins of rivers and coastal shallows, crocodilian forms lie partly concealed, their bodies aligned with the water's surface, their presence difficult to distinguish from the surrounding textures. Beyond them, in deeper areas, marine reptiles move with a different rhythm, their bodies adapted to open water, capable of covering distance with ease. Beneath and between these layers, sharks pass through, guided by senses attuned to signals carried in water, responding to disturbances that travel farther than they would on land. Each of these animals occupies a position that reflects its design, yet the shoreline brings them into overlapping ranges. It is not a single territory claimed by one group, but a shared boundary where multiple systems intersect. The result is not chaos, but a structured complexity, where the likelihood of encounter increases because so many paths converge at once. For a dinosaur approaching this space from inland terrain, the change is immediate. Firm ground gives way to softer footing, and the certainty of each step diminishes. The body, adapted for movement across solid surfaces, begins to interact with water, altering balance and perception. The senses, tuned to conditions on land, must adjust to reflections, to shifting depths, and to movements that are not always visible. In this moment of transition, the animal enters a setting already occupied by specialists. The crocodilian form waits, where water meets land, the marine reptile moves just beyond, and the shark navigates the space below. Each is positioned within its preferred range, yet the shoreline ensures that these ranges are close enough to intersect with those of terrestrial visitors. The repetition of this pattern across different environments suggests that the shoreline itself functions as more than a simple boundary. It acts as a point where ecological roles overlap, where the requirements of different species draw them into the same space. Drinking, feeding, nesting, and migration all lead toward this edge, creating a concentration of activity that increases the chance of interaction. Even nesting behavior contributes to this convergence. Certain areas near water provide conditions suitable for laying eggs, offering access to resources while also placing future generations within reach of multiple kinds of predators. The shoreline, in this sense, becomes part of a broader system where life stages and environmental features align, shaping the distribution of risk. What emerges from this view is a landscape that functions actively within the ecosystem. Geography itself influences the structure of encounters, guiding movement and concentrating activity in ways that create opportunities for different forms of life. The shoreline is not passive ground, but a dynamic interface where the patterns of land and sea meet and intertwine. Across prehistoric time, this pattern repeats, linking different groups of animals through shared spaces. Crocodilians, marine reptiles, and sharks do not replace one another but coexist within this boundary, each contributing to the layered nature of the environment. For any animal moving between inland life and water, the shoreline represents a moment where multiple worlds come into contact and where the conditions of each must be navigated at once. Across certain layers of ancient ground, the traces are not singular, but repeated, clustered, and patterned in ways that suggest more than one life passing through. Nests appear in groups, spaced with a rough regularity, each one marking a place where eggs were laid and tended within a shared area. The sediment preserves these arrangements as quiet geometry, circles and shallow depressions gathered together, hinting at a form of collective behavior that extends beyond solitary existence. These nesting sites speak of colonies, places where many individuals returned, perhaps season after season, to deposit the next generation. The concentration of nests creates a landscape shaped by repetition, where the presence of many eggs at once alters the balance of the environment. Such density carries risk, yet it also offers a form of protection through numbers, a diffusion of attention across many targets rather than a single isolated one. Within these spaces, the arrangement of eggs and the structure of the nests reveal choices in placement and construction. Some are organized in patterns that suggest deliberate positioning, allowing heat from the surrounding sediment or vegetation to contribute to incubation. Others show signs of repeated use, layers of activity built upon earlier ones, indicating that these sites held significance beyond a single moment. Fossil evidence also points toward the presence of adults remaining near these areas. Trackways found alongside nests, as well as the positioning of bones, suggest that certain dinosaurs did not simply leave their eggs behind, but stayed within the vicinity. This proximity implies a form of care, not necessarily in the way modern animals are often imagined, but as a continued association with the place where their offspring began. Beyond nesting grounds, the movement of groups can be traced across ancient surfaces. Parallel trackways, aligned in direction and spacing, record multiple individuals traveling together. The consistency of these paths suggests coordinated movement, a shared pace maintained over distance. Such grouping alters how individuals experience their environment, creating a collective presence that differs from that of a solitary animal. For juveniles, this collective context would have been especially significant. Smaller bodies, still developing, would have moved within or near these groups, their vulnerability offset in part by proximity to others. The presence of adults and peers changes the dynamics of exposure, shaping how threats are encountered and how responses unfold. These patterns of behavior align with the pressures that emerge from a world where early life stages face constant challenge. Eggs and young animals represent concentrated sources of energy, predictable in both location and timing. The repeated return to nesting sites and the formation of groups can be understood as responses to these conditions, ways of navigating an environment where risk is unevenly distributed across life stages. Care, in this context, does not require the projection of human intention. It is expressed through actions preserved in the record, through the arrangement of nests, the proximity of bodies, and the pathways traced across ancient ground. These traces reveal a dimension of dinosaur life that extends beyond the moment of predation into the ongoing effort of maintaining continuity across generations. The presence of colonies and groups introduces a different rhythm into the narrative of prehistoric ecosystems. Alongside the movements of hunters and the evidence of feeding, there exists a parallel pattern of gathering, of remaining, of returning. These behaviors shape the distribution of life in ways that are quieter but no less significant. Within this broader landscape, the act of survival includes not only the avoidance of danger, but the creation of conditions in which new individuals can emerge and persist. The fossil record, in its stillness, preserves these efforts as arrangements in space, allowing the outlines of collective life to remain visible long after the movements themselves have ceased. Long before any movement becomes visible, there is the quiet work of noticing. A head lifts slightly, an eye adjusts to a shift in light. The body pauses, not in stillness, but in attention. Survival in these landscapes depends as much on perception as it does on strength, each moment shaped by the ability to gather information from what surrounds it. Vision plays a central role in this process. The placement of eyes, the size of the orbit, and the structure of the skull all hint at how different dinosaurs engaged with their environment. Some carried forward-facing eyes that allowed for depth perception, an advantage when judging distance during movement or interaction. Others held their gaze more to the sides, widening their field of view, trading precision for awareness of a broader horizon. Each arrangement reflects a balance between seeing clearly and seeing widely, choices shaped by ecological demands. Beyond sight, the sense of smell extends perception into spaces where vision cannot reach. Openings in the skull, associated with the passage of olfactory nerves, vary in size across different species, suggesting differences in sensitivity. A strong sense of smell allows an animal to detect traces carried on the air, signals of presence that linger even when the source is no longer visible. These cues provide information about food, about other individuals, and about potential threats, shaping behavior before direct contact occurs. Hearing contributes another layer, though its details are less easily preserved. The structure of the inner ear, when it can be studied, offers insight into balance and the detection of vibrations. Subtle changes in the environment, a distant movement, or a shift in the ground can be registered through these systems, adding to the overall picture assembled by the senses. These abilities do not exist in isolation. They operate together, forming a continuous stream of input that must be interpreted and acted upon. The body becomes a point of integration, where signals from different sources combine into a moment of decision. Movement follows perception, whether in the form of approach, avoidance, or stillness. The variation among dinosaurs suggests that there was no single model of awareness. Different species emphasize different senses, reflecting their roles within the ecosystem. A predator relying on precise targeting may develop one set of capabilities, while an herbivore moving through open ground may prioritize another. This diversity creates a landscape where perception itself is varied, each organism engaging with the world through its own combination of sensory tools. Within this context, vigilance becomes a constant state rather than an occasional response. It is not a reaction to a specific event, but an ongoing condition maintained as part of daily life. The act of feeding, of moving, of resting, all occur within a framework of attention where the possibility of change is always present. This continuous awareness shapes how interactions unfold. Encounters between animals are influenced not only by physical ability, but by the timing and accuracy of perception. To notice early is to gain time, and time can alter the outcome of a moment. The environment itself contributes to this dynamic, offering places where signals are clear and others where they are obscured. In such a world, the language of human emotion becomes less necessary. The pressures that define life are expressed through the need to detect, to interpret, and to respond. The presence of danger is not an abstract concept, but a set of conditions that can be sensed and navigated. As the landscape settles into quiet again, the work of perception continues without pause. Eyes remain open to the distance, air carries faint traces, and the body holds its readiness. Life moves forward within this steady exchange between organism and environment, guided by the constant flow of information that surrounds it. If the pieces are placed side by side, not as isolated scenes but as parts of a single landscape, a different shape begins to emerge. The idea of one hidden adversary, a single shadow behind the age of dinosaurs, dissolves into something wider and more intricate. The evidence does not point toward one dominant threat, but toward a network, a web of interactions that extends across environments, life stages, and scales of size. Each fragment encountered along the way belongs to this larger structure. The ancient relatives that shared early ground, the ambush specialists at shifting edges, the quiet intruders at nests, the mammals that challenged expectation, the winged forms that moved between air and earth, and the smaller lives that fed unnoticed along skin and feather. None of these stand alone. Each occupies a position within a system that overlaps and connects, forming a pattern that repeats across time. This pattern does not rely on spectacle. It is built from ordinary processes, repeated countless times. A body enters a space where it is not the most adapted. A life stage presents a brief window of vulnerability. A surface conceals movement beneath it. A cluster of eggs draws attention simply by existing. These are not rare exceptions, but consistent features of the environment, shaping how life unfolds within it. The presence of marine reptiles and sharks extends this network beyond land, creating a second domain with its own structure of interactions. The boundary between these domains is not a barrier, but a transition, one that allows connections to form between systems that operate under different conditions. In this way, the network expands, linking shoreline to open water, surface to depth, and land to sea. Within such a framework, the idea of dominance becomes more specific. A dinosaur may be well adapted to one setting, capable within a certain range of conditions, yet this capability does not extend everywhere. Outside that range, other forms hold advantage, shaped by their own evolutionary paths. The network ensures that no single group occupies every position, that each strength is balanced by a context in which it becomes less effective. This understanding changes how the prehistoric world is perceived. It is not a stage dominated by a single type of life, but a layered system where many forms interact, each contributing to the whole. The complexity of this system arises from the diversity of its parts, from the way different strategies coexist and intersect. What makes this more compelling than a simpler narrative is the way it reflects the structure of life itself. The interactions are not arranged for dramatic effect, but emerge from the needs and constraints of living organisms. Feeding, reproducing, moving, and sensing all contribute to the formation of the network, each action linking one organism to another. Within this network, dinosaurs occupy a significant position, yet they are not separate from the processes that define it. They are part of the same system that includes those that could wound them, consume them, or affect their ability to reproduce. Their size and form grant them advantages in certain contexts, but these advantages are always situated within a broader set of relationships. As these connections become visible, the landscape takes on a different clarity. Each element finds its place within the whole, and the boundaries between separate stories begin to soften. What appeared as individual moments becomes part of a continuous pattern extending across environments and through time. In this view, the creatures that shaped dinosaur life are not hidden in a single form. They are present throughout the system, distributed across its many layers. The answer, rather than pointing to one presence, unfolds as a map, one that reveals a world defined not by a single force, but by the interplay of many. In the quiet that follows, the ground holds only fragments, a bone here, an impression there, traces arranged by time into patterns that hint at a world far larger than what remains. These pieces do not form a single, simple story. Instead, they suggest a landscape shaped by many forces at once, each leaving its mark without erasing the others. The age, often imagined as belonging to dinosaurs alone, unfolds differently when seen through these traces. Their presence was undeniable, their forms varied and remarkable, yet the environments they inhabited were never empty of other influences. Land stretched outward into plains and forests. Marshes gathered at the margins of water. Nests marked brief centers of life. And above, the sky carried its own movement. Beneath feathers, within soil, and beyond the shoreline, other lives continued, each occupying a space within the same vast system. These overlapping dominions do not compete for a single crown. They exist together, each defined by its own conditions and inhabitants. A marsh supports forms adapted to its softness and depth, while open ground favors those suited to distance and visibility. The nest, temporary yet vital, becomes a focus of activity for a short span of time. The sky offers another dimension, one that intersects with the land below. The sea, extending beyond sight, holds yet another network of interactions, distinct yet connected at its edges. Within this arrangement, dinosaurs move as part of a larger pattern. Their size and structure allow them to occupy certain roles effectively, yet those roles are always situated within a broader context. Other organisms, shaped by different histories, fill spaces where dinosaurs are less suited, creating a distribution of influence rather than a single line of control. The fossil record, though incomplete, preserves enough of these interactions to reveal their complexity. Marks on bone, the arrangement of nests, the presence of small organisms alongside larger ones all contribute to a picture that is both detailed and partial. Each discovery adds a piece, yet the full extent of the system remains beyond direct observation, inferred through the connections that can be drawn between what has been found. This partial view carries its own kind of clarity. It shows that the prehistoric world was not defined by simplicity, but by layers of interaction that extended across environments and scales. The forces that shaped it were not limited to a single group, but emerged from the relationships between many forms of life. In this light, the idea of complete dominance becomes less fitting. What appears instead is a balance, not in the sense of equality, but in the way different elements coexist and influence one another. Strength in one context does not eliminate vulnerability in another, and each organism navigates a set of conditions that change with place and time. As the scene settles, the impression that remains is not one of conflict alone, but of a world structured by connection. The largest bodies move through spaces that are shared. The smallest forms leave marks that persist, and the boundaries between domains remain active points of exchange. The fragments endure, carrying with them the outlines of this intricate system. Through them, a quieter understanding emerges, one that replaces the image of absolute control with a more expansive view. The most powerful animals to walk the land existed within a network that extended beyond them, shaped by older lineages, hidden presences, and neighboring realms of life. Within that vast arrangement, even the largest forms moved with an awareness shaped by their surroundings, their lives unfolding among forces that were not always visible, yet always present.